The iPhone 12 Pro Max is a very long name for a very large phone. It is a behemoth, and I kinda love it. And I've been in love with using it, by far setting some records for Apple today, so let's begin. Alright, so first off, this is the heaviest iPhone Apple has ever made. This is the highest resolution iPhone Apple has ever made, and it also has one of the largest camera modules I've ever seen on an iPhone, not just in how much size it takes up on the back of the phone, but also how much it protrudes from the back. I know that the 12 Pro Max is technically thinner than the 11 Pro Max, but it really doesn't feel like it because of how large the footprint of this phone is. It's the largest display we've ever had on an iPhone, and I think the reason it feels so much drastically larger than last year, even though it's only a 0.2 inch larger display, is because of that flat edge chassis they've adopted this year. Because in prior years, we've had a 6.5 inch display, but a lot of that chassis was stretched out to a very thin point with that curved off design. And now that that curve is no longer here and it's just straight flat to the edge, it gives the 12 Pro Max a much more bricky, large chonk feeling, to the point that it is by far the most chonk iPhone I've ever used, and I was very comfortable using the 11 Pro Max for the past year. I had just kind of gotten used to that, and switching to the 12 Pro Max for some reason, I'm just like, oh my god, this is an iPad. I got so many iPad vibes from this phone simply because it's got the squared off edge design. It has this stupid cutout on the side that looks like it should hold an Apple Pencil, but somehow it's able to do something even more pointless and just have millimeter wave 5G. Not using it, by the way, still turned it off, even though 12 Pro Max battery life can probably handle it just fine. I'm just protesting it out of principle now because of how dumb it is. But going back and forth between my iPad Pro and this device, it constantly felt like this is a two-handed type of iPhone where you're constantly having to make sure you've got two thumbs ready to go at it at the same time. And no, it's not running iPadOS, though that would be cool, because with a display like this, I can almost start to understand why you would want split-screen multitasking. And I do emphasize the almost. I'm not saying quite yet that that would be a good idea on a display like this, mostly because of the aspect ratio. I think that's the main issue, but because of the aspect ratio iPhones are going with these days, I think that's the primary reason this phone feels so big, because I know I've reviewed other phones in the past with much larger displays than this, but typically they're a lot taller. You know, phones like the OnePlus 8 here also have a 6.7 inch display, but it's so much taller than the 12 Pro Max that the iPhone just feels so much larger because the width is a bit more noticeable, and the display doesn't have any curved corners, which in the $1,000 Android department these days is honestly pretty rare to find. That many phones that just have the display go right to the edge, and personally I dig it. I'm glad Apple's going forward with this squared off look, because it gives the iPhone a much more iconic, representative look than all the Androids that are kind of meshing into each other. All of them having the rounded edge and all of them having the display curve over just a little bit. Sounds like Samsung might finally be taking a hint and getting rid of those soon, but as a whole, I'd say the iPhone looks much more iconic than it has in prior years. And the biggest advantages I think you get out of the 12 Pro Max specifically is the display, which is enormous, and also meaning that the notch feels a lot less intrusive on a display like this, because it's the same size notch across every single iPhone, and when you're putting the same size notch on a 6.7 inch display, it feels like you've got a lot more room to breathe up there in those top widgets, which is awesome. Watching YouTube videos, that notch feels a lot smaller, and because the display is so high resolution, cranking videos up to 4K, you really feel like you get to enjoy a lot of that quality and detail because you have a screen that can finally display not full 4K, I know, but a lot of detail that you couldn't get with average iPhones. The second thing you'll probably appreciate the most about the 12 Pro Max is the battery life. Still by far, I'm sure, the best of the iPhone 12 lineup, but I sadly have to report not as good as the 11 Pro Max. It still gets me through the day, no problem. I'm not saying you have to be like near a charger with this thing, but I will admit that with light use, I could get through 2 days on my 11 Pro Max, and with light use on the 12 Pro Max, it's more like a day and a half. There were a few times I tried to be like, hey, I'm not going to charge my phone tonight and just keep using it for the next day, and typically it would not work out. And then I would have to find a charger, usually by around noon, and while screen on time with the 11 Pro Max could easily hit 10 hours, with this phone it's closer to 8 or 9, so it's still good, but a noticeable downgrade than last year, and a little bit disappointing considering you're spending $1,100 on a device like this. And it is a little weird that Apple makes the display bigger, but the battery smaller, and I'm sure the A14 14 chip is doing the best it can to help out, but once again, feels like a bizarre year to incorporate 5G when you have your battery capacity shrinking internally. Hopefully that leaves them room for improvement next year, because I don't like knowing that the best battery life in an iPhone is in a device that they're not even selling anymore. It just feels weird, so I'm not super happy about that. And of course, the third thing you get with the 12 Pro Max, and I do mean this in order of importance: display, battery, camera. You get some camera advantages with the 12 Pro Max that are not even present in the 12 Pro, and definitely not present in the 12 and 12 Mini. In fact, for some bizarre reason, they decided to give the Max some exclusive camera features, which I'm a little confused by, because frankly, they're not super noticeable. If you're looking for them, you'll probably notice them, but in day-to-day use of photography and videography, I don't think it's a monumental leap ahead of the rest of the lineup. So for one, they have a much larger camera sensor for the main shooter. It's a 47% larger sensor, which you'd think would help out a lot. And honestly, unless you're pixel peeping and trying to zoom in really, really close on images, you probably won't notice. I mean, at a certain point, Deep Fusion can only give out so much detail out of yarn that a photo just looks good. And I'm still happy to say that, in my opinion, this is the best camera you can get on any phone today. And there's a certain amount of confidence that comes with that. When you're able to say whether it's video and whether it's recording 4K, 60 FPS, HDR video, or I'm taking a photo, or I'm trying to zoom in on something, this is probably going to be the best overall camera for most people, particularly if you prefer iOS. If you prefer Android, okay, it gets a little bit more complicated from that. But the iPhone camera has definitely never been better than this. Now with a 2.5x telephoto lens, allowing you to zoom in a bit further than before. Once you incorporate digital zoom, it now allows you to go to 12x instead of 10. While the photos at 12x are not going to be super detailed, they're definitely going to be a bit better than what the telephoto lens has been in the past. And while some people may not see that as a big deal, I was kind of excited for that, because I've used lots of different iPhones over the years, and I'm kind of getting sick of the same old boring telephoto lens. And the fact that this is actually letting me zoom in further than before, I appreciate, and I want to see more updates brought to the telephoto lens in time. I think that's one of the reasons I have a hard time loving or enjoying the iPhone 12 Pro, because it just has the same old telephoto lens that we've been used to for years. So if you're gonna upgrade your phone, I feel like you should either save some money and get something without a telephoto lens, or get an upgraded telephoto lens at that. And I'm confused as to why they couldn't fit a lot of the technology they put into the 12 Pro Max into the 12 Pro. Pandemic affected everybody, including Apple, but the image sensor shift technology they use in the camera apparently allows for slightly better stabilization when recording videos. Personally though, between optical image stabilization and the digital stabilization Apple applies in standard iPhones that are recording, even 4K at 60 footage. Again, I can't say that it's a noticeable difference. If I do a side-by-side, I'm sure you'll be like, yeah, that one's a little more stable, but definitely prototype land is what I would describe the camera with the 12 Pro Max at. It's like, yeah, we're trying some new tech, but we're not really sure how to say it's much better. And reading reports now that they want to bring a lot of the tech they implemented to the 12 Pro Max into the rest of the iPhone lineup next year. I think that means we're in store for a somewhat minor camera year. It'll be like, okay, slightly better stabilization, slightly more detail, but we're definitely peaking and plateauing, in my opinion, when it comes to how major camera upgrades can get year over year. And that's not to say that these year's cameras are bad, it's just that last year's cameras are still really, really good. And the differences year after year are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point that I feel like if you notice the types of detail between the 12 and 12 Pro Max camera, and you can notice that slight edge in sharpness with that larger sensor, then you're probably the type of person who should just be using a dedicated camera anyway. If you're taking a bunch of photos and videos on your smartphone, I think this is more than enough for what you need, and a lot of this stuff is going up on social media, which is going to compress the heck out of it, in which case the differences between those photos and videos are going to be very, very hard to tell the difference of. And that's why, personally, if you're not on the fence, don't listen to me. Obviously, do whatever you want, and I'm fine with you guys buying whatever suits your needs best. But if you're on the fence and you're watching this video because you're not exactly sure which iPhone you want to go with, I would say the 12 Pro Max is not really the phone to get if you're looking for a substantially better camera than the rest of the lineup. If you're willing to spend an extra $100 to $300 just to say you have the best camera in an iPhone possible, and you have that kind of money, I guess good on you, congratulations. But will there be a noticeable difference to everyday people and people on social media? No, I don't think they'll be like, wow, you really got a much better camera since that iPhone 12 you were just using a couple weeks ago. So if you're on the fence, the camera is not a great reason. A good reason would be the display. If you're using the 12 or 12 Pro and you just feel like the display is comfy, but you would like something to feel a bit more gargantuan, obviously I think that's the strongest advantage the 12 Pro Max has. And honestly, it's a bit disappointing that a device like this can't rock 120 hertz because we're just so used to every other phone in the smartphone world that's north of $1,000 at least implementing 90 hertz, and the fact that this is $1,100 and still 60 hertz just feels a little bit behind the competition. And I feel like Apple went all out with the regular iPhones this year. The 12 and 12 mini are insanely good, but the Pros got neglected a little bit because they knew that the Pros are probably not going to sell as well anyway, and there was less effort put into them because they know the techie person, the iPhone enthusiast, is going to buy the Pros regardless of what types of specs it has, and Apple knew they could probably get away with that. But I'm almost like 90 to 95% certain that Apple wanted to implement 120 hertz this year just for the Pros, but because of supply chains and the fact that the only phone really rocking an LTPO OLED panel right now is the Note 20 Ultra at $1,300, it's fair to say the technology is in its infancy. It's probably not even that cheap right now, and the supply chains aren't promising high enough yields yet, so they're not able to scale that production to the extent that iPhones sell. But I'm pretty sure they'll have all that figured out by this time next year, and if you're waiting for 120 hertz, I'm pretty confident in saying you'll get it on the Pros next year. Not the regular iPhones, but if you're on an 11 Pro or even a 10S or 10 and you're just waiting for that giant leap in refresh rate, the thing is, I don't think you're too far away. And it's important to remember, if you're still on the fence right now, that we're in December and new iPhones are probably going to come out in September of next year. So we're only really 10 to 9 months away from new iPhones. This is not even a full year if you're waiting to buy this. So I guess if you're more of a Pro user and you would want maybe cameras to be a bit more ironed out, or LiDAR to have a bit more functionality, because LiDAR currently is just a real fun gimmicky thing if you're into 3D rendering, and the Measure app, which is not even that useful. It feels very much like Apple knew there are some people that are going to buy the top of the line iPhone no matter what, so we might as well throw some of our prototype tech into it and they can mess around with it because they'll love it, but everyday consumers won't notice a big difference. And while the 12 Pro Max is missing a few tech specs that I would have really appreciated, I still think that it's the best an iPhone has ever been. It's the complete package, and if you have large hands and you're willing to kind of sacrifice that one-handed mode that is probably more achievable than the rest of the iPhones, you can get quite an insane package. And I do think to many people this is very much justified at $1,100. Very premium, very enjoyable, but I'm sure many of you are wondering, am I keeping the 12 Pro Max to use as my daily driver, or am I going to be switching to the 12 mini to put my SIM into? That I am so split down the middle on, and I'm so indecisive on this subject, I'm going to save that for another video. But for today's video, I love the 12 Pro Max. This is an amazing phone, and display and battery life are your main reasons to go with it. Thank you all for watching. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.